There's a moment that most people never talk about, that split second after you've made a decision that can't be unmade. You've already removed your employee badge from your blazer. You've already pressed the elevator button. You've already picked up that cardboard box. There's no turning back. And yet your heart is still pounding like maybe there should be. I'm Madison Torres. I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me in a single week, and it destroyed literally everyone who tried to destroy me first. If you've ever been passed over while watching someone less qualified take the credit for your work, hit that like button. If you've ever had your own family weaponize your love against you to force your compliance, subscribe because this story is going to hit you hard. My name is Madison Torres, and this is what happens when you finally stop apologizing for being brilliant. I need to be honest with you right from the start. This story isn't just about career betrayal or family drama. It's about the moment you realize that the people closest to you have been actively working against your success, and that moment changes everything about who you become. Let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in Houston. I was sitting in my cubicle at Meridian Global Trade Solutions, one of the largest logistics companies in the Southwest. The office was the typical corporate nightmare: open floor plan, beige walls, the constant hum of overhead lighting that somehow made you feel sleepy and anxious at the same time. I'd been working there for 7 years. 7 years of 70-hour weeks. 7 years of writing code that nobody else in the company understood. 7 years of letting my family come first, projects come second, and my own life come somewhere around third. My cubicle was positioned at the center of the bullpen, which meant everyone could see my screen, everyone could hear my keyboard clicking, everyone could watch me solve problems they didn't even know existed. I had developed something extraordinary, something that changed the entire logistics industry's understanding of supply chain optimization. I built it on my own time. Nights and weekends in my apartment, using my personal laptop, on my own dime. Nobody asked me to build it. Nobody compensated me for building it. I did it because I'm the kind of person who can't ignore a problem once I see it. The legacy systems at Meridian were prehistoric. They were losing efficiency, bleeding money, and frustrating every single client who worked with us, so I fixed it. I created a proprietary algorithmic system that could predict shipping delays before they happened, reroute freight in real time across dozens of distribution centers, and calculate optimal fuel expenditure patterns down to fractions of pennies. Within 2 months of quietly integrating my system into my daily workflow, our department's productivity skyrocketed. Within 4 months, the entire company was running on my invisible architecture. Within 6 months, the largest client on our books, a company called Vanguard Freight Logistics, was bringing us their biggest contracts, specifically because our routing accuracy had become legendary. Nobody knew that our accuracy was actually my accuracy. Nobody knew I existed. That's the thing about being really good at what you do if you're invisible enough. While doing it, people start to believe the system runs itself. I need you to understand something crucial here. I'm not bitter about the hard work. I'm not angry about the long hours or the sleepless nights or the fact that I missed my sister's baby shower because I was debugging a server-side integration on a Sunday. I'm willing to work harder than anyone else in the room. That's just who I am. What I wasn't willing to accept was the invisibility that came with it. And I definitely wasn't willing to accept the invisibility plus the contempt. Let me tell you about Derek. My brother-in-law Derek Hutchins worked in a different department. He was 31 years old, charming in the way that people who've never had to work hard often are. He had this smile that made you feel seen and special. And then 5 minutes later you realized he was already texting someone else about the exact same joke he'd just told you. My sister Stephanie had married him 3 years ago. They were expecting their first child. Derek's job was technically in business development, though from what I could gather, his actual job was playing golf with senior executives and telling them what they wanted to hear. He was good at it. The executives loved him because he made them laugh. The company loved him because he never created any problems. He was the kind of man who floats through life on charm and timing, and nobody questions him because questioning him would require him to be a real person first. Here's the thing that I think people never talk about. You can work incredibly hard, you can contribute something genuinely valuable to an organization, and you can still be completely invisible if you don't know how to navigate the politics. I knew that. I wasn't naive about corporate dynamics. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that Derek would eventually move into operations management, that he would quietly take credit for every single metric that I had generated, and that I would later discover he had done this with the explicit encouragement of my own mother. The call came on a Monday night. I was working from home, reviewing my final presentation for the senior director position I'd applied for. The promotion should have been mine. Everyone knew it should have been mine. I had single-handedly designed and implemented the infrastructure that generated the metrics senior leadership was currently using to justify bonuses to themselves. My manager had told me the promotion was all but guaranteed. My VP had told me the promotion was just a formality. I had believed them. My mother, Patricia, called at exactly 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I kept staring at my phone in disbelief that she was calling so late. She said she needed to talk to me about something serious. Her tone was urgent, demanding, and utterly devoid of any consideration for the fact that I was working. She said, "Madison, you need to step aside on this promotion." "Jamal, no wait. His name was Derek. Derek needs this more than you do. Stephanie is pregnant with her first child. They're trying to buy that beautiful house in the suburbs, the one with the pool and the guest house. Derek needs a higher salary to qualify for the mortgage. You're single. You don't have a family to support. It's your duty to help your sister." I want to be honest with you. I sat there holding the phone, listening to my mother explain why my career should be sacrificed to fund someone else's lifestyle choice, and I felt something break inside me. Not an angry break, a cold break. A crystalline, logical break, where I suddenly understood that my mother didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a utility. I was the function that made everyone else's life easier. I was the emergency fund, the technical support, the solution to every problem. And when I finally asked for something in return, just this one thing, I was selfish. I told her no. I said no firmly and calmly. I said, "I'm not stepping aside. I spent 3 years building this company's entire infrastructure. I've earned this promotion. Derek hasn't earned anything. I gave him everything. I covered his mistakes, fixed his reports, handled his client complaints so he could look competent at family dinners." "I'm not doing it anymore," my mother cried. Then she got angry. Then she said the thing that I should have recognized as a warning. "If you won't do this willingly, we'll find another way to make sure you understand what family loyalty actually means." I thought she was just angry. Mothers get angry. They say things they don't mean. I assumed this would blow over. It didn't blow over. 3 days later, I was called into the boardroom. The executive floor has this massive glass-walled conference room where they hold all the important meetings. I remember the specific quality of light in that room, harsh, white, fluorescent, making everyone look slightly ill and slightly guilty. I walked in expecting congratulations. I walked in expecting to discuss salary and start date. Instead, I found Marcus Sterling, the VP, the man who'd assured me repeatedly that the promotion was mine, and Derek, sitting across from me at the mahogany table with his leather briefcase and his confident smirk. Sterling didn't bother with pleasantries. He picked up my annual performance review, a perfect review, by the way, 4.8 out of 5, with every category marked exceptional, and he tossed it across the table toward me like it was trash. The papers scattered. "Madison," he said, and I remember his exact tone was the tone of someone who'd already decided this conversation was beneath him. "You're clearly an incredibly hard-working contributor to this organization. But for the senior director position, we need someone with real leadership vision. Someone who naturally commands a room. That person is Derek." I looked at Derek. He was wearing a new suit. It was expensive, I could tell, because it fit perfectly, the kind of fit you only get when you spend money on tailoring. In his hand, he held a pen. It was a Mont Blanc. A $500 Mont Blanc. The exact pen I had purchased for him 2 years ago as a congratulations gift, when I personally pulled professional strings to get him hired at Meridian in the first place. He'd been unemployed for 6 months. I'd risked my own reputation to vouch for him. He clicked the pen twice as I watched him, and he smiled at me. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just won a game I didn't know we were playing. I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. I reached up to my blazer and unclipped my employee badge, the plastic ID card that had been part of my identity for 7 years. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. It was so light. Such a small piece of plastic, and yet it represented 7 years of invisibility, 7 years of uncompensated brilliance, 7 years of sacrificing my own life to keep this company running while my family actively worked against my success. I tossed that badge onto the mahogany table. It landed right on top of my discarded performance review. The sound it made was sharp, definitive. "Good luck with the optimization metrics," I said, my voice completely steady. "You're going to need them." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't offer to train Derek or promise to stay on to help transition my responsibilities. I simply turned around and pushed through those heavy glass doors. I walked out into the bullpen. I could feel every single pair of eyes in that office, watching me as I made my way to my cubicle. My hands were shaking, but I kept my expression completely blank. I grabbed a small cardboard box. I put in my framed photos, my favorite coffee mug, my ergonomic mouse. I moved methodically. I wasn't panicking. I was executing a plan I'd prepared for months, a plan I'd hoped I'd never need to use. I need to tell you something right now. I didn't revoke access to my software out of spite. I need to be clear about that because there's a very real temptation to paint myself as the hero who destroyed the evil corporation. That's not what happened. What happened is I made a cold, calculated business decision. 3 years ago, when Meridian's legacy systems were failing catastrophically, I approached Sterling with a proposal to develop proprietary software. He laughed in my face. He told me that software development was above my pay grade and unnecessary. So I built it anyway. I built it on my own time, using my own resources, on my own laptop, in my own apartment. I developed a highly advanced logistical framework that could predict shipping delays, route freight trucks in real time, and calculate optimal fuel expenditures. When I finished, I integrated it quietly into my daily workflow. Nobody knew I was the architect of the system keeping their company functional. Here's the crucial legal detail. I never signed an intellectual property transfer agreement. I never surrendered my source code to the company. I never agreed that my work product belonged to Meridian. I had established a limited liability company 3 years prior, Nexus Dynamics, and I had filed comprehensive federal patents and copyrights under that entity. The software belonged to me. Meridian Global Trade Solutions was operating on a free, revocable end-user license agreement that I had drafted myself. They were using my private property. I wasn't stealing from them by revoking access. I was simply closing the door to my own house. When I walked out of that boardroom, I went directly to my apartment. I sat down at my kitchen island with my personal laptop. I navigated to the administrative dashboard of my routing system. I clicked into the master control panel. I initiated the revocation protocol. I deactivated every single access key connecting my private server to Meridian's corporate network. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. A small green checkmark appeared, confirming total disconnection. I felt no guilt. I felt no anxiety. I felt cold, crystalline clarity. For the first time in 7 years, I had chosen myself instead of choosing to be useful. Meridian's national freight network collapsed within 4 hours. Trucks were stranded at distribution centers across the country without routing instructions. Their warehouse inventory processing ground to a halt. Within 12 hours, their largest client, Vanguard Freight Logistics, was threatening to terminate their contract. Within 24 hours, the company was bleeding millions of dollars per day. Within 48 hours, my phone had accumulated 90 missed calls. I had turned it off and put it in a drawer. Let me be direct about something. I know this sounds ruthless. I know it sounds like I destroyed a company out of spite. Let me ask you something. If you spent 3 years building something extraordinary, gave it away for free out of goodwill, and then were told you weren't qualified enough to manage your own creation, would you feel obligated to keep gifting it? If you weren't upset about the work itself but about the dismissal, the invisibility, the active undermining of your contributions, would you feel guilty about taking back what was always yours? I want to know in the comments. Write 1 if you think I was right. Write 2 if you think I went too far. Monday morning, I turned my phone back on. It vibrated so intensely it bounced across my granite countertop. 90 missed calls, 154 text messages. The screen lit up with notifications as I watched. Most of them were from Meridian executives. Most of them were panicked. Some of them were threats. Several were from my family. Before I could even process what was happening, someone started pounding on my apartment door. Not polite knocking, aggressive, frantic hammering. I didn't look through the peephole. I already knew who it would be. I opened the door, and standing in my hallway was my entire toxic family. My mother, Patricia. My father, Victor. My sister Stephanie, who was heavily pregnant and white-knuckling her designer handbag, and Derek. Derek stood at the front, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, sweat beading on his forehead. Derek didn't ask permission to enter. He shoved past me into my living room, bringing the frantic energy of a collapsing empire right into my sanctuary. My parents and sister filed in behind him, forming a wall of hostility in my entryway. Derek was completely unrecognizable from the smug executive I'd seen click my pen less than 72 hours ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His tie hung loose. He was pacing across my living room rug, like a man watching everything he cared about burn. "Fix it," Derek screamed, his voice cracking. "Fix it right now. Turn the system back on. Give me the administrative passwords. Give me everything." I closed my front door calmly. I leaned back against the solid wood. I crossed my arms over my chest and I watched him panic. Everything about this moment felt important. Important in a way that history pivots on small choices, and I was making a choice right then about what kind of woman I was going to be going forward. "Fix what exactly, Derek?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level and steady. He swallowed hard. I watched his chest heave. "The entire freight network is completely dead," he said, and his voice had shifted from anger to something closer to desperation. "We have thousands of trucks sitting idle at distribution centers across the country. Drivers cannot get their routing assignments. Warehouses cannot process their incoming inventory. The automated dispatch system is demanding an encryption key that nobody, and I mean nobody, in the entire technology department possesses. You changed the master passwords. You locked us out. Madison, you have to fix this right now." My mother stepped forward. She positioned herself between Derek and me, playing the role of family peacemaker, the exact role she'd played my entire life, the role that always ended with me sacrificing something to restore harmony. She looked at me with that expression of profound disappointment. The exact same look she'd perfected when I was a teenager. She reached out and touched my arm. "Clara, please stop being so difficult," she said, her voice dropping into that sickeningly sweet tone she always used when trying to manipulate me into submission. "You know your brother-in-law didn't mean anything by what happened in that boardroom. He's just under tremendous stress. You are family. You have to fix this system for him." I pulled my arm away. I took a step back, breaking the physical connection she was using to anchor her emotional manipulation. My father stepped forward to fill the gap. Victor was a man who built his entire identity on the belief that he commanded respect through sheer force of personality and financial success. He was about to discover those things meant nothing to his daughter anymore. "Listen to your mother," Victor demanded, his voice thick with the condescension he'd used to control me for 32 years. "You're acting completely out of line. We didn't raise you to be this vindictive. Derek is simply trying to do his job and provide for your sister. You should be helping him succeed, not throwing obstacles in his path because your ego took a bruise at work. Give him the passwords. Apologize for this ridiculous stunt, and we can all move past this immediately." A tiny bruise. I repeated those words back to him, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I built the entire logistical framework that is currently keeping that company operational. I handed Derek every report, every strategy, every single presentation that's Russian. And you call my reaction a bruise to my ego? You call my refusal to be a doormat vindictive? My mother threw her hands in the air, her face twisted into raw, unfiltered anger. She completely abandoned her sweet peacemaker persona. "How can you be so selfish?" she screamed, the veins in her neck straining as she pointed at Derek and Stephanie. "Derek is the provider of this family. Stephanie is pregnant. They are building a life, a real future, and you are trying to tear it all down because you are miserable and alone. It's just like when you refused to co-sign her car loan. You have always been obsessed with watching your sister fail. The mention of that car loan hit me like a physical blow, not because it hurt, but because I suddenly understood that my mother wasn't going to change, that this pattern was going to continue forever unless I ended it permanently. When I was 19 years old, my mother had asked me to empty the bank account I'd built by working double shifts at a diner to pay for my community college tuition. She wanted that money to go toward a car loan for my sister, a car my sister wanted but couldn't afford. When I refused, my mother guilt-tripped me for months. My father called me selfish. My sister cried. But you know what happened? My parents bought Stephanie a brand new Mercedes in cash for her high school graduation anyway. They just hadn't wanted to spend the money themselves. I stepped directly toward my mother. I forced her to look me in the eye. You mean the car loan I refused to pay using my tuition money? I asked, my voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. The money I earned by working double shifts while you and Dad bought Stephanie a Mercedes in cash for her graduation? That car loan? The one where you wanted me to surrender my entire education fund so my sister could have what she wanted? I paused. I made sure everyone in that room understood the next words I was about to say. That pattern ends right now. I will not finance Derek's unearned success the way I refused to finance Stephanie's cars. I will not apologize for refusing to be the foundation upon which you all build your lives. Right on cue, Stephanie let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, and immediately clutched her rounded stomach with both hands. Tears instantly flooded her eyes. "Oh my God!" she wailed, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "The stress is too much for the baby. Madison is doing this on purpose. She wants me to lose the house. She wants me to lose everything." Derek rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. He glared at me with disgust, completely ignoring the fact that his own incompetence had created this entire crisis. "Look at what you are doing to your pregnant sister!" he shouted, his voice echoing off my apartment walls. "You are a monster, Madison. A cold, bitter monster." I watched their theatrical performance unfold. I'd seen this exact script my entire life. Make an unreasonable demand. Accuse me of selfishness when I refuse. Have Stephanie play the fragile victim to force my compliance through overwhelming guilt. For 32 years, it had worked flawlessly. Every single time she cried, every single time they called me selfish, I would eventually cave. I would write the check, do the homework, fix the spreadsheet, step aside, and apologize for existing. But something had shifted inside me. The guilt trip that used to paralyze me now felt completely powerless, entirely transparent, deeply pathetic. I looked at Stephanie, who was peeking at me from behind her hands, waiting for me to break. I turned my back on her performance and walked directly into my kitchen. I picked up a coffee mug from my counter and took a long, slow sip. The rich, dark roast grounded me in the present moment. The frantic yelling, the manufactured tears, the aggressive posturing happening in my living room felt like a poorly written television show playing at low volume. I was completely unfazed. I walked back out and stood leaning against my island, holding my mug with both hands. I watched my mother stroke Stephanie's hair while my father continued to glare at me with righteous indignation. Derek was still holding my sister, murmuring comforting words while shooting me venomous looks over her shoulder. They were all waiting for my capitulation. They expected me to panic at the sight of Stephanie in distress. They expected me to cave. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice did not echo or shout. It cut through their noise with the precision of a scalpel. My father opened his mouth to launch into another tirade, but I held up a single authoritative finger. The gesture was so sharp and unexpected that it silenced him. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Even Derek took a small step back. "Since we are all gathered here to discuss Derek's thriving career," I said, maintaining my relaxed posture against the kitchen island, "let us talk about his actual qualifications. Let us talk about the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations. Derek has not produced a single original piece of data analysis in 2 years. Every quarterly report he presented to the executive board was generated using my custom Excel templates. Every single one. If you ask him to build a pivot table right now, he will break out in a cold sweat. If you ask him to explain the supply chain bottlenecks in the Southern Corridor, he will recite the exact summary paragraph I typed for him on Tuesday." Derek stepped away from Stephanie, his face turning gray. "Madison, shut your mouth," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "He cannot manage logistics," I continued, my voice steady and unrelenting. "He does not know how to code. He does not understand the back-end architecture. He spent his days scheduling catered lunches and playing golf with Sterling, while I managed the entire freight network from my cubicle. The only reason the Vanguard Logistics account stayed with Meridian is because I personally monitored their shipping routes every single weekend. Derek got the promotion because he is excellent at taking credit for my late nights. He is a phenomenal actor, just like Stephanie. But acting does not fix catastrophic network failures. Acting does not reboot a paralyzed supply chain." "You are lying," my mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so dramatic it belonged on a stage. "Derek is a brilliant executive. Sterling said so himself at the holiday party. You are just saying these horrible things to ruin his reputation because you are a spiteful person. I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the apartment. I'm not lying, Patricia, I said, using her first name deliberately, stripping away the familial intimacy. I'm explaining exactly why your son-in-law is completely helpless and why the company is currently bleeding millions of dollars. The system that runs Meridian does not belong to Meridian. It belongs to me. The living room went dead silent. The city traffic humming outside my apartment window suddenly seemed incredibly loud. I could hear my own heartbeat. My father frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in confusion. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge. You work for them. They own everything you do. I shook my head slowly. I built the automated routing system on my own time. I wrote the source code on my personal laptop, sitting right here at this kitchen island on my weekends and evenings. Meridian never compensated me for development. I never signed an intellectual property transfer. 3 years ago, I legally registered a limited liability company. I filed the copyright and the patents under my private business entity. The software that Derek claims to manage belongs entirely to my independent corporation. I granted Meridian a free, revocable end-user license to streamline operations. When Sterling insulted me and gave my job to a man who cannot even run a basic macro, I exercised my legal right to terminate that access. I did not steal anything. I simply closed my own doors. The word corporation dropped into the room like a heavy stone. My parents stared at me, completely stunned. The concept that their quiet, obedient daughter had established a legal corporate entity and secured intellectual property rights behind their backs was entirely incomprehensible to them. They had spent their entire lives underestimating my intelligence, viewing me merely as a support system for Stephanie and her husband. The realization that I was a business owner, a legal entity holding the keys to an entire corporate infrastructure, short-circuited their entire worldview. Martha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Richard looked at Derek, whose pale, terrified face confirmed every single word I'd just spoken. Jamal, no, Derek. Derek knew I was telling the truth. He knew he had built his entire career on a foundation of sand, and I had just washed the sand away. I did not wait for their response. Before anyone could argue or demand proof, someone started pounding on my front door again. But this wasn't my family. This was something much more serious. I need you to understand what comes next, because this is where the story stops being about family dysfunction and starts being about something far darker. Something that will make your skin crawl. I had called my attorney Evan Blackstone immediately after leaving Meridian. I had uploaded all my server logs to his secure encryption portal. I had given him emergency authorization to conduct a forensic audit of Meridian's financial systems while I dealt with the human chaos. What he found was going to change everything. My attorney had been monitoring Meridian's server activities since I initiated the lockout protocol. He had discovered something catastrophic. While Meridian was actively attempting to hack into my private servers using brute force attacks, something that was a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Evan had run a parallel forensic diagnostic on the complete operational history of Meridian's internal systems. What he found buried deep within the encrypted billing cycles for Vanguard Freight Logistics was going to destroy Derek completely. The next morning, I met Evan at an upscale restaurant in downtown Houston. We sat in a secluded leather booth in the back. Evan was a 60-year-old legal shark who specialized in intellectual property litigation. He looked exactly like the kind of attorney who costs $400 an hour and is worth every penny. He pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the white linen tablecloth with care, treating it like it contained something explosive. I found something, he said quietly. While monitoring the brute force attacks against your servers, I ran a forensic diagnostic on their complete server logs. Madison, Derek hasn't just been taking credit for your work. I looked at the folder, my mouth went dry. A chill crawled up my spine, completely unrelated to the restaurant air conditioning. What did you find? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Evan broke the security seal and opened the folder. He slid a stack of dense, highlighted financial routing logs across the table. I looked down at the numbers. At first glance, it looked like standard freight billing data. But as my eyes adjusted to the columns, I realized I was looking at something entirely different. These were shadow transactions. They were buried deep within the automated billing cycle for Vanguard Logistics, our largest and most lucrative client. Derek has been extremely busy over the past 6 months, Evan explained, pointing his expensive pen at a specific cluster of highlighted numbers. He has been quietly embedding ghost invoices into the Vanguard Logistics supply chain. Every time your software successfully routed a massive shipment and generated an invoice, Derek manually intercepted the billing process on the back end. He shaved microscopic fractions of pennies off individual transit costs and redirected those hidden margins into a holding account. I felt the blood drain from my face. I grabbed the papers and pulled them closer. The numbers danced before my eyes, and I understood the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Derek wasn't just incompetent. Derek was a thief. Evan continued, his tone clinical and precise. Over the last 6 months, he has accumulated exactly $1.2 million. It is currently sitting in a digital vault, waiting to be transferred out of the company into an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was premeditation. This was criminal conspiracy. I stared at the papers, and suddenly everything made sense. The promotion, the timing, the desperation in his voice when he showed up at my apartment. Derek didn't need the promotion for prestige, Evan said quietly. He needed it for the executive security clearance. The senior director title comes with level 5 access to the financial systems access that would allow him to bypass the final firewall and wire that $1.2 million to his offshore account without triggering any automated security alerts. But he couldn't execute the transfer without you being promoted, I said, understanding dawning like cold sunrise. And he couldn't be promoted if I was still in the picture, because I had the actual seniority and the actual qualifications. Exactly, Evan said. He leaned back against the plush leather booth. Then he reached into his briefcase again and withdrew another thick black folder. This one was sealed with a tamper evidence security tag. He placed it onto the tablecloth with care, treating it like a loaded weapon. We have a much larger problem. What? I asked, already dreading the answer. Derek didn't just plan to embezzle, Evan said very softly. He planned to frame you for it. We found the execution protocol in his personal email drafts. Once he secured the promotion and transferred the money offshore, he was going to initiate a system crash within your proprietary routing software. He was going to use his new administrative clearance to inject malicious code into the Vanguard Logistics billing grid. He was going to manufacture a massive financial glitch and point the finger directly at you, the original developer. You would have faced federal charges for fraud, while he walked away clean with $1.2 million in an offshore account. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My family had conspired to hand my career to a man who was actively planning to destroy my life entirely. My mother had unknowingly or perhaps knowingly pushed me toward the edge of a cliff to protect a criminal. Derek had sat in my living room just 24 hours ago, holding my sister, acting like a victim, while actively working to manufacture evidence that would send me to federal prison. I was supposed to be the sacrificial lamb. When the auditors found the missing money, Derek would have testified, and I would have faced criminal charges completely alone. He would have walked into that promotion with a higher salary, moved into that suburban house, and lived his life while I rotted in a federal cell for crimes I didn't commit. We need to go to the authorities, I said, my voice shaking with controlled fury. We need to go today. Evan nodded slowly. But first, he said, we need to attend an emergency board meeting at Meridian. Sterling has sent you an extortion email demanding your immediate appearance. He wants you to restore the routing software in exchange for not pressing charges. He has absolutely no idea that his newly appointed senior director is secretly trying to rob his biggest client blind. And he certainly has no idea that by sending you that email, he's documented an extortion attempt and created the final piece of evidence we need to prove gross managerial negligence and conspiracy. I'm going to read that email to you directly because it's important that you understand the mentality of these people, the complete arrogance, the absolute certainty that bullying would work. Due to the catastrophic nature of your unauthorized departure and the subsequent failure of the operational grid, I am officially mandating your appearance at an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. sharp. You will report directly to the primary glass boardroom. Do not be late. Apex Tech Solutions cannot afford any further delays. Therefore, we are offering you a one-time resolution to mitigate the damage you have caused. You will arrive tomorrow morning with your laptop. You will restore full operational access to the routing software immediately. Furthermore, you will sign a legally binding transfer of intellectual property rights, relinquishing any claims your private entity holds over the system architecture. You will surrender the code to Meridian Solutions entirely. If you comply with these terms, we are willing to handle your abrupt departure internally. If you fail to appear, or if you refuse to sign the transfer documents, we will immediately contact federal authorities. We will press maximum charges for corporate espionage, theft of company property, and intentional sabotage. The choice is yours. The audacity of that email was breathtaking. Sterling was trying to force my hand by dangling my freedom in front of me. He genuinely believed I would be terrified of a police investigation. He assumed I would run back to the office, hand over my multi-million-dollar software, and beg for mercy just to avoid a fabricated criminal charge. He thought I was weak. I called the CEO of Vanguard Freight Logistics that same night. His name was Robert Chen. I had never spoken to him directly before, but I had carefully maintained his emergency contact number for years. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Chen," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and professional, "my name is Madison Torres. I am the sole owner and developer of the Freight Dynamics routing architecture, the software that currently manages your entire supply chain. I am calling tonight to personally inform you that the network outage was not a glitch. It was a manual shutdown on my end, to prevent a massive internal financial theft targeting your accounts. I have the complete evidence. I will see you in the boardroom tomorrow at 8:00 a.m. The line went silent. Then Chen said, "I'm on my way to Houston on my private jet right now." The morning air was crisp as I stepped out of a cab and walked toward the towering glass facade of Meridian Global Trade Solutions. I carried a 10-pound black binder in my left hand. It felt like a solid, heavy block of absolute justice. I had spent the entire night printing 500 pages of irrefutable evidence. Federal copyright registrations, patent filings under my private LLC, intellectual property licensing agreements, shadow transaction logs, digital signature verification, offshore account routing codes, all of it organized with color-coded tabs, creating a devastatingly clear narrative of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I swiped my temporary visitor pass at the security desk. The guard who had greeted me every morning for 7 years looked at me with wide eyes. He had clearly heard the rumors. The entire corporate campus was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. My reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors. I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit and black stilettos. I did not look like a defeated employee coming to beg for her job. I looked like a corporate executioner. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I walked down the long carpeted hallway leading directly to the primary glass boardroom. I could see them all inside before I even reached the door. The tension in that space was visible, radiating through the transparent walls like heat waves. Vice President Sterling sat near the head of the table, his face already flushed, projecting the aggressive aura of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. Flanking him were 3 corporate lawyers in identical dark suits. Meridian's internal legal team. They had their legal pads open, pens poised, ready to draft the terms of my unconditional surrender. Several executive board members sat along the sides, watching me with expressions of sheer contempt. They viewed me as nothing more than a rogue employee who had thrown a tantrum and caused a massive financial headache. They thought they were about to witness my absolute destruction. They were preparing to watch Sterling rip my career into tiny shreds. And then there was Derek. My brother-in-law sat directly across from Sterling. He was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. Derek was wearing a brand new, perfectly tailored navy suit, clearly something he'd purchased over the weekend, prematurely, with money he'd stolen. The fabric looked incredibly expensive. When I walked through the door, his eyes locked onto mine. He gave me a slow, victorious smirk. He truly believed he had me completely cornered. Sterling cleared his throat loudly, demanding the room's attention. The murmurs died down instantly. He gestured toward a single empty chair, positioned at the very opposite end of the long table. It was the seat traditionally reserved for subordinates facing severe disciplinary action. It was a position of extreme weakness meant to make the person sitting there feel small and surrounded by enemies. "Sit down," Sterling ordered, his tone flat and uncompromising. "We have a massive operational crisis to resolve, and my patience is entirely depleted." I did not move toward the empty seat. I did not break eye contact with Sterling. I did not show a single ounce of fear or hesitation. Instead, I walked deliberately toward the head of the table. My stilettos clicked loudly against the floor, a steady, unyielding rhythm that disrupted their perfectly planned intimidation tactic. I stopped right next to the empty space where Robert Chen, the CEO of Vanguard Freight Logistics, was meant to sit. I placed my heavy black binder onto the polished mahogany wood. The loud, heavy thud echoed through the silent room, causing one of the lawyers to jump slightly in his seat. "I'm not here to negotiate a surrender," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "I'm standing at the head of this table because that's where the person who built this company's entire infrastructure should stand. And I'm here to show you exactly what you tried to destroy." I opened the thick black binder. I pulled out crisp, color-coded documents. I handed a packet to Sterling and slid identical copies directly in front of each corporate lawyer. They stopped glaring at me and started reading. The room was perfectly silent, except for the sound of turning pages. "Page 1, I instructed, my voice calm and measured. "That is the federal copyright registration for the foundational architecture of the routing software you have been attempting to hack into for the past 72 hours. It was filed 3 years ago. Page 2, the official patent registration under Nexus Dynamics, where I am listed as the sole proprietor. Page 3, my employment contract with Meridian. Notice my role was strictly defined as data analyst. No provisions for software development. No requirement to code proprietary systems. No clauses claiming secondary intellectual property created outside my designated working hours." Sterling was staring at the papers, blinking rapidly as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. The lawyers' faces were growing paler with each page. One of them pulled out his smartphone and started checking federal registration databases, verifying every single document I'd presented. "I built that routing system on my personal computer in my apartment using private resources," I continued. "Meridian never compensated me, never offered a buyout, never acknowledged its value. You simply took the results and handed the credit to Derek. Because I never signed an intellectual property transfer, and because I developed this entirely on my own time, I retained complete legal ownership. The license I granted you was conditional and entirely revocable. When you handed my promotion to a man who cannot write a basic data query, I exercised my legal right to terminate that access." The lead attorney looked up from his smartphone. His face had gone completely white. "The documents are authentic," he said, his voice trembling. "Federal registrations, copyrights, patents. She owns the entire source code outright. We have absolutely no legal claim to that software. None." Sterling looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His jaw dropped. The aggressive bullying persona he'd worn just minutes ago completely evaporated. He stared at me, his eyes wide with newfound terror. "But that's not the worst part," I said quietly, pulling out the embezzlement evidence and spreading it across the mahogany table, directly in front of Robert Chen, who had just walked through the glass doors. I hadn't noticed him arrive, but he was standing there in a sharp charcoal suit, his expression unreadable, his eyes locked on Derek. I looked directly at Chen. "This man," I said, pointing to Derek, "has been systematically stealing from your company for 6 months using the exact infrastructure that I built. Shadow transactions totaling $1.2 million. Ghost invoices embedded in your billing system. Money redirected to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He needed this promotion specifically to gain the executive security clearance required to finalize that theft. And he needed me gone so I couldn't detect what he was doing with the system architecture I designed." The boardroom erupted. Board members gasped. Lawyers immediately started texting. Sterling began hyperventilating. Derek's face went from pale to a shade of gray I didn't know was possible. He stood up from his chair, looking toward the door, calculating whether he could run. He couldn't. Robert Chen was already stepping closer to him, and I could see something shift in Derek's expression the moment he realized there was no escape. Security arrived within minutes, but before the officers escorted Derek out of that room, before they read him his rights, before the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, there was a moment where Derek looked directly at me. His eyes were pleading. His mouth was open, ready to say something, to make some final argument that might save him. I said nothing. I just watched. The officers marched Derek out of the glass boardroom and directly into the main bullpen of the operational floor. The entire company had stopped working. Hundreds of employees had abandoned their cubicles and lined the main aisle. These were the exact same people who had stood in stunned silence 3 days ago when Sterling threatened to destroy my career. They had watched me carry a cardboard box to the elevator. Now they were watching the newly appointed senior director of operations being paraded through the office in handcuffs. Derek tried to lower his chin to hide his tear-stained face, but the officers kept him moving at a brisk, unrelenting pace. Whispers erupted across the floor like wildfire. Cell phones were discreetly raised to capture the historic downfall. His public execution was televised to his peers, his subordinates, and his rivals. Within 24 hours, Meridian Global Trade Solutions had lost its largest client. Robert Chen issued a formal termination of contract, citing gross negligence and willful managerial incompetence. Sterling was fired by the board of directors. Derek was transferred to federal custody pending trial. The company filed for bankruptcy within weeks. But the real devastation happened at my parents' house. Federal investigators traced the complicated web of Derek's fraudulent financial activities, and that dangerous web led directly to my family's doorstep. My parents had co-signed Derek's mortgage loans. They'd attached their pristine credit histories and their entire retirement portfolios to secure that suburban house for Stephanie. When investigators revealed that Derek had submitted falsified tax documents to qualify for those loans, my parents were discovered to have made themselves legally liable for millions in fraudulent debt. The bank immediately called the loans due. The suburban dream house was seized. And because they had co-signed on documents secured by federal fraud, the bank successfully petitioned to freeze my parents' personal assets entirely. Their retirement accounts, their investment portfolios, the massive equity in their own home, all of it locked down pending a federal financial investigation. My mother called me 47 times that day. My father called 31 times. Stephanie called 62 times. I deleted every single message without listening to them. I blocked all 3 numbers and never unblocked them. Imagine for just a moment what it's like to watch people who raised you lose everything because they refused to see who you actually were. Not out of malice, out of willful blindness. They couldn't see my value until someone else was trying to destroy me. They couldn't appreciate my contributions until someone tried to take credit for them. And they couldn't love me unconditionally until their own survival depended on it. 1 year later, I stood in an office on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise in Houston. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I was no longer a hidden developer working in corporate anonymity. I was the chief executive officer of Nexus Dynamics, a fully operational tech enterprise with 50 engineers on staff and funding from Robert Chen's personal investment firm. The irony was almost poetic. The man whose company Derek tried to rob had become my business partner. The infrastructure I'd built in secret had transformed into a legitimate market powerhouse. The intellectual property I'd protected legally had become the foundation of a multi-million-dollar company. My attorney Evan had kept me updated on the legal fallout. Derek was convicted on multiple federal charges and was currently serving a 7-2-month sentence in a federal corrections facility. Meridian Global Trade Solutions had liquidated its remaining assets to satisfy creditor demands and federal fines. And my family. Well, my family had become a cautionary tale about the cost of choosing comfort over honesty. Here's what I want you to understand. This story isn't actually about revenge. It's about the moment you realize that protecting people who refuse to see your worth is a form of self-betrayal. It's about the profound loneliness of being invisible in rooms full of people who claim to love you. It's about the specific kind of courage it takes to choose yourself when the entire narrative around you says that choosing yourself makes you selfish. If you have ever been told that family loyalty requires endless sacrifice, if you've ever felt the weight of other people's expectations crushing your own dreams, if you've ever stayed in a situation, whether that's a job, or a relationship, or a family dynamic, because you were afraid of what would happen if you left, I want you to write 3 inches the comments. I want to know you're out there. The truth is that walking away isn't always an act of destruction. Sometimes it's the most powerful act of self-preservation you can make. Sometimes the people we love have to face the consequences of their own choices, and our job is to love ourselves enough to let them. I built something extraordinary while invisible. I developed infrastructure while overlooked. I created value while being told I had none. And then I made the choice to claim what was mine. Not out of anger, out of absolute clarity. If that resonates with you, if there's something in this story that makes you want to stand up straighter, to claim your own worth, to draw your own hard lines, please share this video. Subscribe because I'm going to keep telling stories like this. Stories about people who refuse to be invisible anymore. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I want to know this message reached you wherever you are. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm Madison Torres, and my life is finally, completely, entirely my own. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, companies, or events is coincidental.